In the last 15 years, the United States, more than ever before, has lost all its democracy and has become a plutocracy. It's the wealthy people who run the United States. It's not Trump. It's not Biden. And it has made the United States a dysfunctional state and a plutocracy.
This was Evarist Bartolo. Evarist was a career diplomat, he was former foreign minister of Malta, and he's one of those rare voices that force you to lean in, not because he's loud, but because what he says really matters. I often find myself reflecting on the conversations I host on this channel. Over time, I've welcomed guests who have shared remarkable, sometimes even jaw-dropping stories. Testimonies that, frankly, deserve a much wider audience. If I didn't genuinely believe their words carried value, I wouldn't keep doing this. I wouldn't hit record. It's as simple as that. And then there are people like Evarist Bartolo. Calm, composed, and effortlessly articulate. He doesn't need to raise his voice. His insights land with precision, as you will see. There's a kind of quiet gravity to him. But don't mistake that softness for weakness. He speaks with the clarity of someone who has been in the room where decisions were made. Someone who understands the architecture of diplomacy not through dominance, but through dialogue. Coming from Malta, a small nation by geography, but one deeply entwined in global currents, Evarist brings a perspective that's as nuanced as it's rare. He's not theorizing from a distance. He's lived a history he comments on, and that lends his words a quiet authority. He doesn't speak about diplomacy, he embodies it. So I invite you to lean back, clear the noise, and listen closely. Because with Evarist Bartolo, what you see is never quite what you get. There's always more beneath the surface, and it's worth your attention. But before we dive in, just a quick but important note. This channel is being shadow banned. Yes, really. Here's the latest screenshot of a viewer comment that came in today actually. It's one of many I've collected by now, and it's just to show you that yes, shadow banning is real. So even if you're subscribed, and I really hope you are, and even if the notification bell is on, the algorithm doesn't play fair. Content like this doesn't always reach the people who really want to hear it. That's why I'm asking you to also subscribe to my Substack. It's completely free and you will get access to deeper reports, long-form analysis, and interviews without algorithmic interference. Evarist Bartolo, how are you on this nice July morning?
Okay, it's sunny and warm over here in Malta, so it's okay.
I envy you. You're sitting on a nice island just below Italy on Malta. Yeah. A
Yes,
very
but with listen, Thomas, with global warming, it is not the climate of the Mediterranean anymore. It's become the climate of the Middle East, actually,
you get it
because
warmer and warmer.
bring up, yes, it's quite hot. It's quite hot.
Yeah. And I'm sitting 4.5 meter. Sorry. I'm virtually sitting 4.5 meter below sea level. So I'm slightly concerned too about climate change.
Yeah, I can understand.
Good. Evarist, I have a couple of notes in front of you. I mean, first of all, for the benefit of our viewer, you were kind enough to send me extensive documentation. I immersed myself the last week in it, and we will come back to it. And I found to my surprise, that's my bad because I didn't know that when you were born, actually, Malta still was a British colony.
Yes, yes, yes. In fact, I lived for, let me see, 12 years as a British subject because I was born in 1952 and we became formally independent in 1942, 1952, sorry. I'm lucky enough to have lived the main important dates of our nation in the last century, in the sense that there was independence. Then in 1974, we had the Republic, where for the first time our head of state was Maltese, because even with independence, the Queen Queen Elizabeth was still our queen, based in Buckingham Palace. And then in 1979, the military bases were closed, so I was lucky to see that as well. So moving from a British military base and the headquarters for NATO in the southern Mediterranean. In 1979, we closed down all our military and naval bases. And then it was good that in 1986, in our constitution, we have incorporated neutrality, which says that we cannot allow any military bases and we cannot join any military alliances. Things got complicated when we joined the European Union in 2004, and they have become more complicated now because it's becoming very difficult to distinguish between NATO and the European Union. So we are in a quandary, I think.
Yeah, well, I was wondering about it. You said not allowed to have any military bases, but that's of course excluding US/NATO bases, because I know on Malta you have US NATO bases.
No, 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 not anymore. No, definitely. The last bases that we had were in 1979, and those were closed down. So, uh, formally and substantially, there are no military or naval bases or air bases in Malta. No. Where there is a big pressure for us to join NATO, whether formally, but informally, the pressure has already started, is to become an important logistical base for NATO in the Mediterranean. That pressure has started. Uh, it's enough for me to tell you that if you look at the last Biden policy for Malta published, so this is online, so it's not a conspiracy theory. Um, Online, the first goal of the US mission in Malta is to align Malta to US interests, and which means that they don't respect at all our constitutional neutrality. Imagine if our embassy in Washington were to say our first goal in Washington is to align Malta's policy and work towards the United States going against its own interests. So formally, no basis, but as I said, increasingly, especially in the last 2 years, pressures have increased for Malta to be absorbed within the militarization program of the EU, and because of that, in NATO.
Hmm. You were till 2022
22.
Malta's foreign minister, right? And as such, of course, you have deep insight into the mechanisms behind the clockwork of the European Union, which seems to be bent on a war with Russia. But having said that, we have agreed today we talk about China, and potentially in the future we will talk about Europe going into war with Russia. Actually, a two-front war, yeah. So NATO, Europe, Russia, and China. But today we talk about China. And I have seen that you actually were in China. So thanks to some documentation that you have sent me, you have been in China. I know that you have an interest in China. I have to say, I tried to do some research in regards to your books. You have written 4 or 5 books. Unfortunately, not a single one was translated into English. They're all in Maltese. And I have to
Yes.
confess, I have I speak 4 languages, but I have slight difficulties with
Of course,
Maltese.
because Maltese is a very unique language. It's a Semitic. It's the only Semitic language in the European Union. About 70% of it structurally is Arabic, but Arabic of 1,000 years ago. So it's interesting from that point of view as well.
Absolutely.
But yes, Thomas, I've been to China. In the last 20 years a number of times as a parliamentarian, then as a minister, both as Minister of Education and then as Minister for Foreign Affairs. And even since I've retired, I've been to Beijing and Shanghai also because I'm involved in some educational program at the Shanghai University of Politics and Legal Studies. So I try to understand, which is not easy, to understand civilization which is 4,000 years old. And one thing that I really appeal for people, whatever judgment they conclude then about China, is to have some humility and try to understand the history of China, the civilization of China, because like other civilizations, it has its own characteristics. And especially if we want to live together on this blessed planet, we need to understand each other and we need to respect each other.
I hope your words are heard, but if I look at the geopolitical situation at the moment, we are walking completely in a different direction.
No.
And if you talk about history, I mean, I can go out of the street here and ask anyone, when we talk about Hong Kong, yeah, how come that, Great Britain had kind of leased Hong Kong for 99 years? And how come that China was ready to go to war if because there were voices, yeah, we should lease it another 99 years or so. China would have gone to war over Hong Kong. But people
Yes.
do not know the background story. How come? So maybe you can tell us.
No, but imagine, Thomas, imagine if China were to go to London and tell them, I want the Channel Islands, or I want the Isle of Wight, or the Isle of Man. This idea that the West owns all the world, but then is shocked that China considers the territory around it and the sea around it as crucial, is terrible. And it is definitely a legacy of colonialism. If our people today in the 21st century, wherever they are living, do not try to understand colonialism and what colonialism means, I'm not saying what colonialism meant, because there is colonialism as a continuation in other ways. I mean, and where it's at its worst is in the mentality. It's quite easy to change flags, to change heads of state, to have a national anthem, and to say that now you are sovereign and that you are running yourself. But we know that, first of all, I think most of the leadership in the West, successive generations, have not decolonized their minds, because we need decolonization not only of the colonized, but also of the colonizer. And the colonizers have not decolonized their minds. They still believe that what they've done in the last 500 years, you know, it's still there, and it's natural that the West is supreme and is superior, and it's natural that it controls the rest of the world. And if we look at history, the last 500 years, the West has strengthened this kind of mentality theologically, culturally, scientifically, but most of all militarily, because all the civilizations, Western civilization in the rest of the world, is built on the destroyed civilizations of the conquered. And it takes time. And the West has not unlearned colonialism. So for them, if and this is something which we must understand about China. I have a friend, a Spanish diplomat who's a veteran, who's good. I respect him a lot. But he was shocked because in China, they show a lot of films about the century of humiliation. What's the century of humiliation in China? When the West, different countries, actually invaded China and told China, you must do what we tell you, including also importing heroin and not take any steps to control heroin, even if the country was being destroyed. So you had different countries, like, for example, Portugal was controlling Macau,
The Dutch.
the Dutch, UK, Germany, France. The UK was controlling, the maritime part and Hong Kong. And when eventually there was the War of Liberation and China managed to push back those that had conquered it, also because of the Second World War, they still kept Hong Kong, and they wanted to keep Hong Kong. I mean, it's like Cyprus, our neighbor Cyprus, still has two sovereign bases on it. Now, they became independent before us, but they still have sovereign bases, which means that in those two bases, not only are they controlled by the UK, but they are sovereign. They are British territory. And whatever happens in them, whether you use them to bomb Gaza, whether you use them to bomb Lebanon, Iran, Syria, you don't have to tell the Cypriot government what you are doing. Hong Kong was in a similar situation, and uh, China could not accept that. In the same way that China cannot accept that, the United States and the European Union say that they want Taiwan, and they want Taiwan to be more aligned to the United States and to the European Union than to China, to whom it belongs. Imagine what happened, and I remember it distinctly, this, Thomas, even though I was only 10 years old, the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Yeah.
So when the Soviet Union, stealthily, and as far as I know, against the advice and position of Fidel Castro, placed missiles in Cuba, the United States said, we're ready to go to war. As if we're going to allow an island which is so near Florida, so near Miami, to have missiles pointed at US cities and at US facilities, at US industries. This is an existential threat for us. So if Cuba, rightly so, is considered an existential threat for the United States, if it were to have missiles on it, doesn't the same apply for Taiwan? Doesn't the same apply for Ukraine?
Exactly.
Imagine if China decides to have an agreement with Mexico to have military and naval bases in Mexico. Will the United States say, Mexico is sovereign and Mexico has a right to tell China to come in? Or imagine, there's Scotland somehow or other wins independence, and any great power that decides to have a foothold in Scotland, and the UK would say, it's okay. Why not? I mean, the Scots are now sovereign, and it's up to them to decide. And this is a tragedy, because this should not have happened, in the sense that what is going on in Taiwan and what is going on in Ukraine, with a cooperative security system, this doesn't happen, because my security should not come at the expense of your security. We should have cooperative security. And I think this is one of the biggest differences, and I think in this case, even civilizationally, between the West and the rest. The West still has a zero-sum mentality. The only way I can win is if I put you down. China, and this is a civilization of 4,000 years. So I'm not saying it's the virtues of Xi Jinping. And I want to make it very clear, the same way that I dislike how the West divides the world into good and evil, the West equals good, and practically the rest equals evil. I don't want to turn the tables and say that the rest is good and the West is evil. We're not talking about theology here. We're not talking about Manichaeism. We're talking about human beings living in different circumstances with different interests. And the challenge is to find ways of living together. I would claim that the Chinese civilization is more ready to live with others, unfortunately, than the Western civilization. The West wants to dominate, wants to be better, and wants to be superior, and considers itself superior, whereas China, all it seeks is to live with others, but it doesn't want to be inferior. You don't have to be inferior. And I think this is one of the biggest challenges that the world is really facing, especially as the West, which is now an empire in decline. The most advanced part of it economically is tied strictly to the military industrial complex. So it's as if the West needs markets for its military industrial complex. It needs wars. The rest doesn't need wars and doesn't want wars because they want their resources to be used to develop their countries, to get people out of poverty, to spend on healthcare, to spend on education, to spend on infrastructure, on wealth creation, and on wealth distribution. And this is the biggest tragedy, I think, that we face, because on this planet of 8 billion people, we still have everywhere, not just this idea of the global south. Poverty is not restricted to the global south. It's enough to have a look at what's happening in our continent, on the European Union, in the
Even in
United
America.
States itself.
Yeah.
Millions and things are getting worse. Things are getting worse. We're talking at the beginning of July, when the Commission has just presented its budget for the coming years of the European Union, and you have less money going to development, to agriculture, and on social policy, and more money going to Ukraine, more money going also to the military, at a time when people need to have their lives improved, at a very dangerous time when democracy is being totally discredited because it has not delivered. And this is worrying. This is worrying.
You said too many things now for me to
I'm sorry. Stop me.
going. No. You said many interesting things, each of which would be worth commenting on. Yeah, but two things. Yeah. So first of all, I think you said something very, very important. The West, and we can define who is the West, but I think it's very clear, is at the tail end of between 500 and 600 years of hegemony. And for myself, it took a while to realize, because I asked myself, it's always the same country, yeah, Europe, UK, Australia, Canada, the US, of course, yeah, Japan, not to forget, South Korea, meanwhile. So why are these countries so aligned and hell-bent on confrontation? Yeah, but if you see it in the context of that, the West is really in decline after 500-600 years of hegemony, and they're trying to keep in power at all costs. Yeah, so I, for myself, I then compare especially the US as the proverbial elephant in the china shop. But I'm saying for myself, this is not just a elephant in the china shop, it's a wounded elephant in the china shop, and we have to see how much damage this elephant can still cause before its eventual decline. But coming back to China and to what I said at the very beginning, I just want to highlight for some viewers. Yeah, yes, there were how shall I say this, colonial drives in China. Yeah, but very specific. Hong Kong was taken by force because the Chinese emperor forbade cheap Indian opium to be imported into China. Right. So there were 2 or 3 opium wars, and as a result of which, the UK forced China to give up Hong Kong, which is one of the reasons why China has this, a century of humiliation, which is completely understandable from their side, right? So, and whilst China now is building up and has taken more people out of poverty than any other country in the world, it's encircled. It's virtually encircled. I see, when I edit this video, I see if I can get a map of all these American bases, more than 800 military bases around the world, which are basically encircling China and Russia. Yeah. One last thing, because you said Cuba crisis, and there are many, many similarities. I mean, Nixon was not the only one who taped the White House. Kennedy did it too. So we know that Kennedy had his hands full of preventing his hawks of preemptively nuking both Russia and China. right? And I'm sure these type of conversations are happening right now in the White House, using nuclear weapons preemptive. And I had a couple of other speakers on my channel, inclusive Professor Glenn Deason, which you also had spoken to, who are equally concerned, right? So to pivot our conversation again to China, and knowing that you have some expertise in this area, also knowing that you don't have a crystal ball, but if you can encapsulate, where do you think we as the West are going vis-a-vis China?
First of all, I think it's important for us to understand that the West is not a homogeneous bloc, especially today, because it's a house divided as well. Even if you take Europe on it in itself, there's a difference between the Baltic and the Eastern European countries, the Scandinavian countries, and then the South, like Spain, like Italy, like France. They have different positions. Even regarding China, which I think is important. I was so hopeful that 4 years ago there was the comprehensive agreement between China and the European Union, which would have changed the relationship that the EU has with the rest of the world, including China. But the American hawks told the European Union, no, 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 don't sign an agreement with China, because China is a threat. It's not a competitor. It's an adversary. It's becoming an enemy. And unfortunately, the European Union meekly obeyed. Now, this is something which also tells us that when we talk about the West and the domination in the culture of the American empire, it wants to do that even towards the European Union. So it doesn't consider the European Union as an equal. Recently, I've been looking at the last 50 years of relations between the EU and the US. And at one point, Kissinger is saying that he doesn't like the Europeans, obviously at that time we're not talking about the European Union, to talk with one voice. He would rather deal at that time with 14 dwarfs than with one giant. He actually, casts the role of the United States as if it's Snow White and the rest of the world have to be dwarfs. The rest of the world, imagine, even if you consider your allies to be simply your vassals, imagine what your opinion is of the rest of the world. So China was okay for two reasons at that time, and if we take the last 50 years. Number one, to drive a wedge between China and the Soviet Union. The Nixon trip was to make sure that let's keep China and the Soviet Union apart. Interesting, but we won't go into this today. The same policy applied for let's keep Germany and the Soviet Union apart. Let's make sure that we keep them apart. The
That's the
Germans and the Russians.
That's the
You know,
geopolitical nightmare, if you allow me. That's the geopolitical nightmare of America, German know-how, Russian resources, and the first general secretary of the NATO said it already. Yeah, the aim
yes,
of NATO. So Lord Ismay said it. Yeah, the aim of NATO is to keep America in, Germany down, and Russia out. And
exactly.
there's even a website. It's called Lord Ismay Restated, where you see plenty of consecutive administration officials kind of repeating the same thing.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. So with China, it was this approach. That's number one. Uh, but then it was what was very important is for the American entrepreneurs to start investing in China because it was very attractive for them. They had a big workforce with very low wages. So go there, produce your things there, and send them back to the United States. And this is the big uh, joke or the big lie that Trump today says, that the Chinese have ripped us off and, they've taken our industry. The industry was sent there by the Americans themselves. That's why they went to China. And that's why at that time it was convenient to talk about globalization. So globalization is good, open borders are good, free trade is good, open trade is good, because it's okay for us. It's, America uh, wants always everything on its own terms. So when globalization is good for me, it has to be good for the whole world. Now, obviously, this approach of taking factories from the United States and taking them to China, Vietnam, India, without providing alternative employment to those communities has left the United States in the big crisis it is in now. Because if you look, you talked about China getting millions out of poverty. It's in reverse in the United States. In the last 50 years, if you just read, American economists, so this is not propaganda. If you see how the top 10% have improved their wealth, and amongst them are the entrepreneurs who have a lot of shares in the military industrial complex. Okay? And then you see what's happened to the bottom 50%. The situation has got worse for them. So China getting people out of poverty, the United States letting people drop into either poverty or an inferior quality of life to which they had been familiar before. So till it was convenient, globalization was praised. Then, when this situation becomes very difficult, instead of having painful restructuring, because the United States needs painful social and economic restructuring. How do you reindustrialize? You have to do a lot of things. You can't simply say tariffs. I'll put tariffs and investment is going to, flow into the United States. So now it's become important. And I was shocked. A few weeks ago, I was reading some speeches of Janet Yellen and Christine Lagarde, where actually they were talking to some CEOs, telling them, now trade, you must get used to the fact that trade is going to be carried only with a small basket of friends. I mean, how can you say that? How can you say that? After all, it's not even realistic. I can't understand how people like Yellen and Lagarde think that you're going to have the resources, the markets, the supply chains coming only from 14% of the world, because that is what the West amounts to. And you need, if, for example, you just say, look at what happened in recent weeks when China said, no more rare earth exports to the United States. Big crisis in the car industry. They started stopping production. So we have to live together. If we don't live together, we fight each other. And that's terrible. We have been here before. What is different? I mean, if we look at the last 500 years with empires going down and new powers coming up, usually that's the time for wars. What is different this time? This is the first time in the human history that the rivals have nuclear weapons with which they can destroy each other and the rest. Bertrand Russell, 80 years ago, hoped that this would terrify leaders into sobriety, tolerance, and sanity.
Sanity is gone. Diplomacy is dead. US Ambassador Josh Friedman told me diplomacy is dead. And what you said about the jobs in China, right? You said it. I mean, the tariffs. Let's start with the tariffs first. Yeah? I don't know how many interviews done in America where people seriously believe China is going to pay the tariffs. People do not realize, no, you are an importer, you import something, and you as American importer, you are paying the tariffs. And of course, you have to increase your price vis-a-vis your customers in order to, get the money back. Yeah, China is not paying any tariffs, nor does
And
any
Thomas,
other.
I think we must keep this in mind because I think even though we're discussing international relations, ultimately international relations depend a lot on what happens in domestic situations.
Of course.
Because I think that Trump is playing with fire, even with his own electoral base. Because if you've been elected, that you're going to look after the vulnerable, you're going to look after the abandoned, you're going to improve the price of eggs and the price of what you eat, and you're going to find jobs. And this does not happen, you know, because it's as if you were going to produce all this magically. It doesn't happen. What's going to happen in 2 years' time when the elections come up at for Congress? So,
I'm concerned about the next elections because Trump definitely shows dictatorial traits, right?
but biology there
Yeah,
will
yeah, 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 yeah,
ultimately
yeah,
help.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But one thing that really puzzled me as a European from the outside, right? How can you truly believe, yeah, that a billionaire with a track record of Donald Trump is really looking out for the impoverished people? I mean,
Yes, yes.
th
No, it doesn't make sense. And
it
that,
doesn't
then
make
if you
sense at all.
see, and then if you see the bill that has just passed, it's a bill that will
Yeah,
punish
yeah,
the most vulnerable people,
yeah.
because it fits their Medicaid, it fits their social
Unbelievable,
services,
unbelievable.
disability, and then rewards billionaires. And this ties a lot with your work on what you've done with the military industrial complex and how the United States is preparing for war with China. It completely reinforces your arguments because what has happened there is that you have increased again the budget for armaments,
Yeah,
but at the same time reducing because you don't want to tax the rich, and then, in fact, you want to exempt them from more taxes. And then at the same time, you cut social expenditure on disability, on poor people, on people who do not have private insurances. And at the same time, Thomas, what I find very interesting, and I don't know, I have a lot of respect for a veteran Singaporean diplomat, Kishore Mahbubani.
is he still
Kishore,
alive? Is he still alive?
yes, he's still alive. He has produced a lot of books. I think he's one of the main experts on China. And what is very interesting, and other American military experts are saying the same, that you are spending so much money on armaments that are obsolete. The new war will not be won with jets,
Conventional, yeah, with
with
conventional, yeah,
military jets, with
yeah,
tanks,
yeah,
with aircraft
yeah.
carriers, but in a different way. So even the impressive evidence that you've produced to show how much money is being spent, the question that Kishore Mahbubani asks, when this money is being spent, is there a strategy? Is it a modern war that the United States want to fight? Or is the military industrial complex, the lobby that, President Eisenhower warned the United States 64 years ago, you know, and now he would be shocked because since then, the influence of the military industrial complex has increased even more. I think, especially, and this is something we must not forget, especially after the ruling of the Supreme Court in 2010 in the United States, when wealthy people took the Electoral Commission of the United States to court, saying we have every right to fund politicians and political parties as much as we like. And the Supreme Court at that time had a majority enough of, of judges who said yes. In the last 15 years, the United States, more than ever before, and this is what mainstream American politicians are saying, has lost all its democracy and has become a plutocracy. It's the wealthy people who run the United States. It's not Trump. It's not Biden. It's the political, it's the political leverage that the billionaires have on members of Congress, House of Representatives, the Senate, the think tanks, the media is impressive, and it has made the United States a dysfunctional state and a plutocracy. But what is worrying is that this plutocracy is dominated by people with vested interests in producing more and more armaments, even if it's not in the interests of the United States and not in the interests of the rest of the world, obviously. This is very, very, very worrying. This is very worrying because, it's being said that if you have only a hammer, everything becomes a nail.
Exactly.
And if you have a hammer, you will use it, whether you have a reason to use it. So this is worrying. One thing, Thomas, that had shocked me as a minister, I had spent a lot of time as Minister of Education, is that when I became Minister of Foreign Affairs, something which I didn't have to read books, I saw it happening, is to have, for example, the French Foreign Minister being a very successful arms dealer. And then you try to understand why. First of all, the military industrial complex in France is probably one of the most advanced sectors in the French economy. So they need to sell arms to improve their exports. Now that is also something which I think is quite new in the world, which I think is very, very dangerous. When economists need to export arms, because it's part of generating employment, it's part of, earning foreign currency. So this is very worrying. It was explained to me, and it was somebody who was friendly, so he wasn't anti France or anti this French minister, that he was considered such a good arms dealer because he used to be elected from that part of France where the factories producing arms are placed. So they are his constituency. So he was working for his constituency. It wasn't because he was an evil man who wants war everywhere and he wants to sell arms and he wants to sell fighters and he wants to sell submarines. No, had his constituency been producing shoes, he would have promoted shoes. But as they were producing armaments. So, and what I noticed is if you have diplomats, in this case, politician diplomats, ministers, who are supposed to be working in diplomacy and, in managing international affairs, actually pushing for military contracts to be signed. So diplomacy has not died in the last 3 years. Diplomacy has been in crisis, I think, for probably the last, I don't know, the last, I would say, the last 30 years at least, if not more. If not more. Can you imagine the Cuban Missile Crisis happening in today's situation? Would Kennedy have restrained the hawks who wanted to bomb this planet out of existence? He kept saying his first approach was, we must not destroy this planet. Khrushchev had the same problem. There were the same pressures on him. The two leaders understood that, they have to rise above the situation. Unfortunately, we're not in the same situation where we have political leaders, I think especially from the West, because if you hear what is being said, I mean, even regarding China from the European Union, you have somebody like von der Leyen and especially Callas saying, the Soviet, the Russia, we must, Russia's an enemy. We have to be prepared for Russia, but even China. I mean, it doesn't even make sense. It
No,
doesn't even.
they're expanding NATO activities into the Indo-Pacific.
Yes, it's
Yeah.
a global NATO. It's a global NATO. It's as if the Monroe Doctrine has become a global Monroe Doctrine. Once upon a time,
Yeah.
you had your sphere of influence, but now all the world is my sphere of influence, and I do whatever I like, and you have no right to protect yourself.
Mm.
You have only the right to obey me and to give me your resources, because another important thing that we must understand when it comes to decolonization is the acquisition of resource sovereignty. How can you have real sovereignty if your natural resources, whether it's tin, oil, gas, gold, rare earth resources, are still controlled from outside? That is a hollow sovereignty. And if we see what has happened in the last 80 years with the process of decolonization and countries becoming independent, the former empires started pushing back and assassinating those leaders who wanted resource sovereignty for their countries. If you take Iran, for example, no, Mossadegh was removed because he said we must nationalize our oil. That belongs to us. We must use it to develop our people, our country, and not let us be, continue to be raped and exploited by the former empires. So that is why today, I mean, they want China to be
Russia too.
China, which does
Russia
not.
too. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, and Iran as well.
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah.
we can only accept the rest of the world if it follows what we tell them. If they still abide by the rules that we have written for them, but not for us, because again, this is incredible. I remember some years ago, I think it was 3 years, 4 years ago, when Biden came up with this brilliant idea of organizing, the Summit for Democracy, dividing the world into angels, obviously the United States and its friends, and the devils, the authoritarian countries, China and the rest. And Janet Yellen had the honesty to say, listen, if you want to launder your money, if you want to hide your gains from corruption and from drug trafficking, you know where to go? There's no need to go to a small island in the Pacific or in the Mediterranean or somewhere else. Come to the United States. Come to Delaware. Come to New York. Because if we're going to be honest, she said, we must lead by example. We still have made it possible a lot for companies to be registered in the United States where you don't know the ultimate beneficiary owner and what they are doing. So at the same time, then you use the Financial Action Task Force for coercion, to the rest of the world to tell them, we're going to punish you if money laundering is happening in your country. And then you have the European Union becoming hysterical about Chinese and Russian wealthy entrepreneurs, uh, well, because they are Chinese and Russian. And they are not Chinese and Russian who are willing to weaken their countries, because they also make a difference of which oligarchs to attack.
Hmm. Because you mentioned my report twice, let me do a little bit of self-promotion. Yeah. So
Yes.
I wrote an executive brief, which I wrote for executives for some of the world's largest tech companies. And you were so kind to read my draft, which will be published publicly Thursday or Friday. So today's already Thursday, tomorrow
Yeah.
on Substack. So it outlines how, in detail, it outlines how America is preparing for war, so for active hot war with China, all under the guise of, peace through strength, etc., etc. These euphemisms that they're using. But I've analyzed the preparations, and uh, you read it. So given what you read in my report, What, from my perspective, there's only one conclusion, but that's me. You have read my reports too. So what's your conclusion based on this report?
First of all, it terrifies you because it provides the evidence that what you're saying and how these preparations are taking place, not only by increasing military budgets everywhere and getting your allies to increase their military budgets, but actually preparing actively facilities, bases, training people, having war games where the Chinese get very worried that this is not rhetoric, this is not just words, but they are actually actively preparing to humiliate us again. This is the words that they use, and we will not allow ourselves to be humiliated again. And that is why for them it's important that they remind their people, about the century of humiliation. What you have done there in your article, and I really appeal to those to start reading it and continue reading it till the end, because it's a formidable read, because not only do you give factual evidence, but you also provide the sources, obviously, to show whether what you're saying is factual or not, especially in today's age of disinformation and fake news. It's important that we still have such quality information available to us, which is built on facts and not simply on interpretations and on narratives, because this is the most terrifying word that we use today, no? Narratives. We have a narrative. We create a story. Whether it is true or not is not important. Make that story, believable, and especially built it on fear. Built it on fear. And peace is always more difficult than war. The slogan "peace in strength" reminds me of the peace of cemeteries. No, that when somebody dies, sometimes we say, "May he rest in peace." That is not the kind of peace that the world needs. The world needs peace, development, investment in improving the lives of people on this planet. Sorely needed.
So the one thing that I did not include in the report, but that I was asked yesterday, which kind of highlighted to myself that I missed something, was how long will it take? When will this war break out? I mean, again, I know you don't have a crystal ball, but I think, also, given the preparations, given they're already so advanced, I don't think we talk about
Now,
10 years or.
what is worrying is that the decline of the American economy is still going strong, whereas the economic growth of China is doing well. Yesterday, the new statistics came out, and for the first 6 months of 2025, China grew by over 5% across different sectors, not in one sector. What is also happening, Thomas, and I think this is something which I think not enough attention is being given to it, is that the United States, at least those who really want war and those who want it's not that they want to compete successfully with others. It's that they do not play fair. If I see that you are running ahead of me, I can either train to start running better. This is what Confucius used to refer as exemplary competition. No? Exemplary competition for him was if you have two archers and one is better than the other, the one who is falling behind has two ways now to deal with this. Either obstruct the other one, create problems for the other one, not to hit the target, or train and improve his skills to become a better archer. Now, the United States, unfortunately, is now obstructing China, hoping that China will fall behind and will stop the growth of China. The opposite is happening. When the United States took the decision some years back, started first with Trump, but then also accelerated by Biden, is, for example, no more chips for China, no more sensitive technology for China. What the Chinese have done, and they have a very strong science and technology base. China spends on scientific research much more than the United States, even before Trump, because now the budget, because one of the things that the bill has done for the American universities is that they have a lower budget now for themselves. So China has the scientific capability to produce its own technology. Let me point out an important fact. There is ASPI. ASPI is the Australian Social Policy Institute. Every year, they track 64 technologies that a country needs today in the 21st century. In their last report, out of 64 leading technologies, China leads in 57. 57 out of 64. In the second place, it's not the United States. The United States has lost its historical advantage. It's India. India is in second place. The United States is leading only in 7 out of 64 technologies. Before, it had 60, it had 50, but now it is obvious that the rest is overtaking the West because it's not just China. Economically, no need to say demographically, although China has its demographic challenge, and it will have its demographic challenge, economically, technologically, and militarily. So if the situation gets desperate, and instead of saying, look, I need to put my house in order, I need to start restructuring my economy. I need to start spending more on education. I need to invest more in our people, to develop their skills, to rebuild our economy. If both in the United States and in the European Union, instead of restructuring, they say, the shortcut is more armaments, more armaments, then the situation becomes more dangerous. And when you have, again, reading your article, when you have so many things happening, exercises, maneuvers, and if something goes wrong, that's it's worrying. It's worrying because I think this idea of trying to get people to prepare for war, first of all, is because they know that, I think both in the United States and in the European Union, they are not in favor of war with China. They are not in favor of war with China, you know. So it's important that you try to make people as worried and as fearful as possible. And you have, and especially in your area of study, what is frightening is that you have governments now getting paid psychologists to appear on television, telling parents, listen, it's okay for your sons and daughters to die in war because it's for a noble cause. Now, the problem that both, I think, in the United States and the European Union they have is that there is a lot of disaffection, a lot of disillusion, and they do not admire the leaders that they hear talking about the need to go to war. To go to war for what? And especially if they need that money for their healthcare, for their education, for their infrastructure, for their jobs. So it becomes worrying. It becomes worrying. When do we reach the desperate moment of a war breaking out? It's terrible.
There's one element which, as behavior analyst, and I did my own academic research, concerns me highly. So I figured out how, well, I came to realize how easy it is to manipulate a whole population into war. It doesn't take much. And again, I don't want to pivot into Ukraine, but I interviewed Professor Ivan Kaczyński. He wrote his PhD on what in 2014 actually happened in Maidan. Yeah? And one of the key events was that those snipers shot both on the population, yeah, on the protesters, and on the police. Right. So
Yes,
this is a key thing because that then kind of incentivized both sides, to basically clash. Yeah.
yes,
So
yes.
from a propaganda perspective, yeah, and if you talk about propaganda, most people think the Second World War, Goebbels, master of propaganda. No,
Oh,
Goebbels learned it from an American, from Edward Bernays, who was the American-based nephew of Sigmund Freud. Yeah. So Edward Bernays helped get the US in the First World War, etc. Thanks to him, it was modern suddenly that females smoked. Yeah, he called it torches of freedom. This is how they sold cigarettes. And thanks to Edward Bernays, till today, people think ham and eggs as breakfast is a healthy breakfast. No, it's a propaganda stunt for a company. Yeah. So
yes,
it's
yes,
human behavior, to manipulate human behavior, I'm afraid to say, is very, very easy if you
yes.
know how to do it.
And have a look at what's happening in the Baltic Sea, where there's a confrontation taking place, and where I think the neighboring countries there are practically on a war footing. Because if for Russia to have a cargo ship leaving the Baltic Sea, it needs to accompany it with a military warship. That is as if we're already at war. And what is worrying is at the beginning of this year, there was an incident where Russia was accused of sending a ship to cut a cable, to cause damage. The Swedish prosecutor, so because this was a Swedish cable, actually came out with a report saying, no, it was a cargo ship by mistake because of the storm, dragged the anchor and damaged the cable. But a few weeks before, the Foreign Affairs Council of the European Union had already condemned Russia that it was sabotaging the underwater cables. It did not come out again to say, we're sorry, it wasn't you. you know. So yes, it's so easy to manipulate people to say, constructing an enemy is easy. Solving your own problems is much more difficult. So the important thing is construct an enemy, say that there is an enemy outside coming for us. Let's unite against the enemy. You
Mm.
know, the
There are
barbarians are coming.
There are a number of prominent examples. One that is better known is of course, the Gulf of Tonkin incident, which caused the Vietnam War. But one incident that is much lesser known, and specifically less than 1% of the American population is aware of the USS Liberty incident.
Yes,
And
yes.
I know about it because I interviewed Phil Turney, who is a survivor, very briefly. So Israel attacked a American warship in 1967. Yeah, and they not only attacked it, they repeatedly tried to sink it. Afterwards, they claimed, it was a mistake. But meanwhile, and I can put a link in the description, we have the radio transmits between ground control and the
Yes.
pilots. The pilots radioed back to ground control. This is an American ship. Are you sure? Are you sure? Yes, sink it, sink it, sink it. You have to attack it. Yeah? And they wanted to sink it to get rid
Yes.
of all the
I
the
have gone into that story, Thomas, because USS Liberty came to Malta to be repaired at the Malta dockyard. And it was completely secret. They covered all the areas where the work was going to be carried out because there were still dead bodies in the ship when it came to Malta. So they didn't want the story to come out, you know. So they wanted to blame Egypt. Israel wanted, obviously, the United States to come on its side and attack Egypt. So yes, this is very worrying. It's very worrying.
I'm just giving it as an example. It's not so that it didn't happen. Yeah. So both sides are now on high alert. The public, the Western public, is not for war. So what can sway public opinion? Well, an incident. Yeah.
Yes, yes,
There's now a word for it. It's called, as two words, false flag operations. But if you mention this, you're right away in the conspiratorial corner. But if you from an objective investigative perspective, look at incidents that already happened, it happened. These things happened,
yes,
and there's a total disregard for the loss of their own people. And I interviewed the Swiss historian Dr. Daniele Ganser, who wrote his PhD on NATO's stay behind armies. It's a very, very interesting topic because it's linked to Olof Palme murder. It's linked to all kinds of political assassinations. And he said, people must realize that sometimes states kill their own people to achieve a strategic objective.
yes, yes. This is what makes it worrying. What I'm hoping, but again, as we say, hope is not a strategy; it's a wish. Is that perhaps because the leaderships, both in the United States and in the European Union, see that their powers are at risk by turning their people against them because of social and economic hardship, it might save us falling into the abyss.
Yeah, or the
And
other way
that,
around. Sorry, or the other way around. They could use this as a pretext to kind of cover,
yes,
this
yes,
this
yes, yes.
internal.
I think that is being used already. I think it is being used already. And whoever says this is accused also of spreading disinformation and of being a Russian apologist. Um, I don't know. I only wish that ultimately even these leaders understand that if they continue going in the direction that they are, and at the moment there seems to be no sign that they want to break the speed with which they are driving themselves towards war.
They're driving us to war. Yes,
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 yes, yes,
yes,
yes, yes. It's worrying.
yes,
It's worrying. I think earlier this week there is Dmitry Trenin, the Russian
yes,
political scientist,
yes,
who
yes.
has actually published an article saying that the Third World War has already started. Territorially, it is confined to some areas. But actually,
Sorry, before you go there, and I would like you to highlight this, yeah. But maybe it's important to highlight first who Dmitry Trenin is, because he's not just the next best Russian.
no, exactly. He's someone also who has extensive knowledge also of America and of the West. So he's not a propagandist.
And he was
He's not.
pro-American in the past. He was
Yes, yes, yes.
pro cooperation. Yeah,
Yes, yes. I think he was also in the Carnegie Endowment, I think,
yeah.
in the United States. So in Russia for the United States. So he's not a simple
Propagandist.
propagandist. No,
Yeah,
no, not
yeah.
at all. And his analysis is quite worrying. No, his point is this, that territorially it's still confined to some areas, but the plan from the US and from part of Europe, which is following closely, is to try and defeat Russia, take on China, defeat Iran. No, because basically these countries, the rest of the world wants to develop, highways, wants to develop trains, wants to develop ports. So that would make them even economically more stronger and autonomous. They do not have to depend on American financial institutions, although they are called world institutions, like the World Bank,
Mm.
like the IMF, WTO, uh, and they don't want an alternative model to succeed. One of the reasons why they don't want China to succeed is because though China is not running itself as a kind of, you know, where the state owns everything and the state says whatever happens, but it's a more complex economic system. It's there's still very much a mixed economy with private investment, both Chinese and foreign investment, and state enterprises. And all the three sectors are doing well, mind you, which is interesting. They don't want that model to succeed, you know, because otherwise people will start saying, listen, if the Chinese have managed to get so many millions of people out of poverty, how come we don't do the same? How come we don't have the same policies? Why do we have to follow different policies? And one thing that had struck me, even, and I had discussed this with Minister Wang Yi when I visited him in Chengdu 4 years ago. I was putting the point that the Charter of the United Nations, you know, talking about human rights, about democracy, about equality, and for mankind to be free from fear and want. So it's important to take people out of poverty. This is the point that I was making with Wang Yi, and he understood what I was saying politically. I said, listen, I think it's very good that we take people out of poverty. But the best situation would be that they are also free. So it's not good to have unfree people, they are fed. But it's also not good to have free and unfed people. We need both. And that is a project which is still a global project. Every country still has that challenge because the best democracy and human rights is when you bind together political, social, and economic rights. If you're homeless, what does democracy mean to you? If you have very low income and you're really struggling from one month to the rest. I was listening recently to the what they call BNPL. 50% of American consumers are doing BNPL. And I said, what is BNPL? Buy now, pay later. Now, this used to be before used for extravaganza. You know, you wanted to go on a holiday to another state because most of the Americans go to other states. They do not go outside the United States. And that is one of the tragedies that Americans do not know what the rest of the world looks like. Uh, and you want to buy a car and you want to buy something which is a bit of a luxury. But now they are using buy now, pay later for essentials, for actually what you need. So in that situation where you're really struggling with your quality of life, what does democracy mean to you? So that is why the Charter of the United Nations talking about political, social, and economic rights being indivisible still apply to everyone. Still apply to everyone. So, you know, and I believe that there should be different models of democracy. I think China still has to contend to see how it can improve political freedoms. It has improved social freedoms and economic freedoms. I think it will be a challenge for China to see how political freedoms can be improved. And I think it's in the interest of China to work in that direction as well.
On that note, Evarist Bartolo, before we end this conversation, I mean, I have a whole list of topics we still could discuss, but is there a topic that's very close to your heart that we have not scratched on today?
Now is the issue of war. I think it has become very important for I think for a lot of my political life. I saw that the biggest challenge for us on this planet is learning to live together, learning to live together. But it's learning to live together, not learning to dominate you or learning, you know, for me to be dominated by you. And learning to live together in a planet where you have so many different languages, so many different cultures, so many different religions, so many different vested interests is not easy. It's easier to say, no, 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 no. Why should we learn to live together? We should have the clash of civilizations, not the alliance of civilizations. As much as possible, let's have the Shiites fighting the Sunnis, Let's have different religious sects fighting each other. And even though we've become a more, especially in the West, we've become a more secular society, the kind of divides that have been created by religion in the past are still there in a political mindset. If before we felt superior because we were Christian and the Pope gave us permission to go to the barbaric countries, and if they are not Christian, we can do whatever we like with them and take the land and kill them.
Was it not as recently as Pope Francis, I believe, who kind of uh,
After 530 years. And it
yes.
is interesting that it had to be a pope coming from the global south.
Yeah, but you have to tell now what he did.
Yes, so there was this doctrine of discovery. The doctrine of discovery in the 15th century, it's in 1493, I think. The Pope called the Spanish and the Portuguese and told them, listen, I know that you're going to these countries. Now, don't fight against each other about which country to take. He told the Spanish, you take this side. I told the Portuguese, you take the rest. As you are Christian and you're going to evangelize these people, go there. You can do whatever.
Evangelize. Yeah.
Of course, with swords, not with the cross. They did not arrive with, praying and chanting religious hymns and showing the cross. They actually showed swords and cannons because Western colonialism dominated because of superior weapons, not because of superior civilization. So he gave them the right to actually colonize the rest of the world, do whatever you like with these barbaric countries. They are not even human beings. Do whatever you like. Now, this is definitely not Christian. This is definitely not what Jesus Christ taught, that our neighbor, even our enemy, we should love our enemy, let alone human beings like us who have done nothing to us. This went on This doctrine went on for 530 years, and it was used to justify colonialism. Even the American government, in a case that it had in Latin America, actually used that doctrine to justify why the United States had the right to take over that territory. Indigenous people from the South came to the Vatican during John Paul II and told him, please remove that doctrine, remove that papal bull. He did not remove it. They came when Benedict XIV was there, 16 was there. He did not remove it. Pope Francis, because he lived it, was the first one to actually say, we remove it, and we also ask for forgiveness of what was done in the name of Christianity. But the fact that it took 530 years, I think in that area, Thomas, the church is more advanced than in politics. Because a lot of politicians from former empires, presidents, prime ministers, ministers, still find it difficult to say sorry. Let alone to pay compensation. Malta is in the British Commonwealth. We are still in the British Commonwealth. Some of our members in the Caribbean have asked the British Empire to pay compensation for what they did in the past. No, no. And they were very hurt that Malta sided with those who asked for compensation. They said, how come you did not side with us? The former empires still want the former colonies to have the Stockholm syndrome. Accept to be abused, accept to be hurt, and love the people who hurt you. Now, I do not say this to generate hate, and division, because we need healing. But the healing has to take place from both sides. It's like peace. That's why peace is difficult, Thomas, because for war, and this makes me more worried about what you were saying, for war, it's enough for one side to wage war. For peace to happen, you need both sides. So, so coming back to your question, it's the ability to live together. If we do not find, and it's difficult, there's no doubt about it. It's complex. There's no doubt about it. Birds of a feather stick together. I prefer to live with those who think like me, who have the same color of skin, who have the same culture, who simply reinforce who I am, than to adjust to living with others who have different cultures, different ideas, different languages, different religions. But the only way forward is for us to learn to live together. Otherwise, the alternative to coexistence, now, whether peaceful or unpeaceful, because we talk a lot about peaceful coexistence, let us at least have unpeaceful coexistence, because the alternative to peaceful or unpeaceful coexistence is no existence.
On that note, Evarist Bartolo, it was my pleasure talking to you.
Same here. Thank you very much.